Welcome everyone. This is a session on land, labor and credit markets. Let us move to our first module, which is on land ownership pattern. Now, to discuss about this issue, let us start with a particular question. Why is this particular issue important? Now, this question is important because it acts as a motivating factor and helps us to have a greater understanding of this particular issue. Now, if we look at the land ownership pattern of agriculture in developing economies, we find the existence of two major features. First, there exists high inequality in the land distribution pattern in the developing countries. Now, whenever we talk about inequality, we generally talk about income inequality. However, if we observe the inequality in the land distribution pattern, we find that the extent of inequality is much more compared to that of inequality in the income distribution pattern. The second feature is related to the lack of property rights for a large number of people working in agriculture. Now, these two features jointly have a number of consequences. Number one, land may not be used efficiently. Number two, large tracts of lands may not be fully utilized. Number three, food production may be below potential. And number four, there can be migration of unemployed laborers to overcrowded cities. So, keeping these consequences in background, let us now start our analysis. In our analysis, we shall start with learning about the importance of land and its ownership and distribution pattern. After that, we shall focus on the type of labor contracts. Then, we shall talk about the land ownership pattern across countries and continents. Now, let us start with the importance of land. Now, as we all know that in economics, land is always considered to be an important factor of production. If we look at the neoclassical production function, we find that along with labor, capital and organization, land is considered to be an important factor of production. Here, we shall focus on agriculture, and remember that in case of agriculture, the importance of land is much more compared to that of other sectors like manufacturing and services. So, we have talked about the importance of land. Now, let us move to our starting question. What is the significance of land distribution pattern on the land market? So, our question is on the significance of land distribution pattern on the land market. Now, to understand its importance, let us start with an example with three people holding 3 units of land. Now, for the first case, let us consider the first row of the diagram. There are 3 people each holding 1 unit of land. Now, what do we mean by 1 unit here? Now, here by 1 unit, we mean the maximum amount of land that can be cultivated by a particular individual. So, in this case, each individual is holding that amount of land which can be cultivated by herself. So, in this situation, each individual will cultivate her land herself. So everyone is cultivating her land. So no question of emergence of land market here. Now, let us try to introduce a bit of inequality here. Now, this is shown in the second row. Now, let us cut half unit of land from the third landowner and give it to the first landowner. So, what is happening here is that in this case, the first landowner is getting 1.5 units of land. The second landowner is holding as usual 1 unit of land, while the third landowner is now holding 0.5 units of land. Now, what will be its consequence? Let us start with the first landowner. The first landowner is now holding 1.5 units of land. That means, after giving her full effort, the individual will find that there exists 0.5 unit of land in which she cannot cultivate. In other words, there is now an excess supply of 0.5 units of land. Now, what about the second landowner? As usual, the second landowner is now holding 1 unit of land which can be cultivated by herself. So, no problem in this case. Now, what about the third landowner? The third landowner now have 0.5 units of land. So, even after cultivating the land, the third landowner in this case will find that she has additional amount of labor left within her with which she can cultivate another 0.5 units of land. So, she has an excess demand of 0.5 units of land. So, in this case, an excess supply of 0.5 units of land is created along with the generation of an excess demand of 0.5 units of land. So, in this case, a land market will generate. Now, why is this land market generating? Because of the existence of inequality in landholding pattern. So, therefore, we can conclude that inequality in the land distribution pattern leads to the emergence of land market. So, the implication of inequality in the land holding pattern is the emergence of land market in the economy. Now, given this as background and having the idea that we now have a land market, we shall move to our next question, that is, if there is a land market, then how many type of land contracts do we observe in that land market? So, how many types of land contracts are there? Now, if we look at the land market, then we find the existence of mainly 3 types of contracts: owner cultivation, pure tenancy, owner-cum tenancy. Now, there are other forms of contracts like cultivation by communities, cultivations by group, etc. So, now if we club them under the heading of other type of contracts, then we actually find that there exist 4 type of contracts: owner cultivation, pure tenancy, owner-cum tenancy, and other forms of contract. Now, what do we mean by owner cultivation? In case of owner cultivation, the owner cultivates the land herself. Now, what about pure tenancy contract? In case of pure tenancy contract, the owner gives the land to a tenant or a number of tenants depending on the size of the land. The tenant then cultivates the land on behalf of the landlords. What about owner-cum tenancy contract? In case of owner-cum tenancy contract, some part of the land is cultivated by the landlord and some part is given to the tenants. So, in fact, this contract is actually a mix of the first two contracts. Now, I have already talked about other types of contracts. Now, before moving to the next part of our discussion, let us, for the time being, give some time to get some idea about certain clarificatory issues. The first issue is related to country classification. Now, if we classify countries according to their importance in agriculture, we find that there are mainly three types of countries. The first type of countries are known as urbanized countries. Now, these countries have less dependence on agriculture. These type of countries are found in Latin America and Caribbean islands. The second type of classification is of transforming countries. Now, these countries are comparatively higher dependent on agriculture. Around 7% of their economic growth can be attributed to agriculture. Around 2.2 billion of people live there. The third category of countries are known as agriculture-based countries. These are the countries of our focus. Now, in agriculture-based countries, agriculture is the major source of economic growth. Around 32% of their GDP growth can be attributed to agriculture. According to World Bank estimate, around 417 million people live there. So, after discussing about country classification, let us move to our second clarificatory issue, which is related to variation in agricultural productivity. Now, if we consider agricultural productivity across countries, we find that agricultural productivity of countries vary widely, not only between developed and developing economies, but also within the developing economies. For example, if we define agricultural productivity in terms of grain yield per hectare and take the productivity of UK as the basis, then we find that in India, agricultural productivity is 1/3 of that of UK. Now, what about countries like Nigeria? For those countries, agricultural productivity is 1/6 of that of UK. For countries like Sudan, agricultural productivity is almost around 1/12 of that of UK. So, there is a huge dispersion in agricultural productivity across countries. Now, at the aggregate level, we find that the overall agricultural productivity in developing countries is less than 1/20th of that of the developed countries. So, a wide divergence in productivity between developed and developing countries. So, keeping these clarificatory issues in mind, let us move to our next question. How is the landholding pattern across the developing world? So, how is land distributed across the developing world? Now, if we look at the land ownership pattern across developing world, we find that the average landholding size is smaller in Asia compared to that of Latin America. So Latin America has now a higher average size of land. However, if we consider inequality, we find that the inequality in landholding in Latin America is high compared to that of Asia. In Latin America, only 1.3% of landlords own as much as 71.6% of total landholdings. So, the extent of inequality is significantly high. Now, one of the implications of such difference in landholding pattern is that there exists significant variation in the dominant form of land contract across continents. For example, in Asia, the average land size is small. As a result, there exist more owner cultivators compared to the countries in Latin America and Africa. In Asia, around 85.5% of the landowners are owner cultivators. The comparative figure in Latin America is only 60.3% and that of Africa is only 5.2%. Now, what about Latin America? In case of Latin America, higher average land size along with higher inequality leads to the dominance of pure tenancy contracts. Now, in Latin America, 17.1% of the landowners are engaged in pure tenancy contract. The corresponding figures in Asia and Africa are only 5.9% and 1.6% respectively. Now, if we consider each of the continents separately, we find that in case of Asia, though inequality in landholding is less compared to that of Latin America, if we consider the absolute amount of land inequality, then the land inequality is significantly high. Now, why is this so? Now, according to Middle, the intervention of British rule accompanied with the rise in the power of moneylender ultimately led to a significant rise in the power of large landlords. At the same time, high rate of population growth led to the fragmentation of holdings. Now, these three factors combined together resulted into huge inequality in landholdings in Asia. What about Latin America? Since colonial times, the Latin American agriculture is characterized by the existence of dualism. There exist very large lands which are commonly termed as latifundio. The latifundios are so large that they employ at least 12 people. Some farms are so large as to employ more than 1,000 people. At the same time, there exist very small size of lands which are termed as minifundio. The minifundios are so small that they are capable to employ only a family of 2 people. However, latifundio and minifundio do not constitute the entire land of the Latin American countries. There are medium-sized farms, that is the farms who are capable to employ 4 to 12 labor. At the same time, there are family farms which are capable to employ 2 to 4 people. What about Africa? Africa is an outlier in this context. In Africa, most of the lands are held by groups. So, there is a dominance of group in farming. Now, each group is mostly engaged in subsistence farming in the village community. Each group has some excess amount of land in their hand. This not only helps them in shifting cultivation, but also helps to reduce the power of landlords. Each member of the group has the right to land and water in their vicinity. So, this is how the land is distributed in the developing economies. So, what we have learned is that inequality in the distribution of land leads to the formation of land market. Secondly, there are 4 types of land contracts in the land market: owner cultivation, pure tenancy, owner-cum tenancy, and other forms of contract. Thirdly, we found that the size distribution of farms vary widely across countries and continents. Now, this in turn leads to the large difference in land cultivation pattern. For example, there are high amount of owner cultivators in Asia, high amount of pure tenants in Latin America, and so on. So, this is what we have for this module. Thanks for watching.